Artificial intelligence was a terrible name for what it is, because it's not. It's algorithms. It's about like learning, and I feel like a data scientist a lot of the time needs to be able to say, no, let's not do this. This is a bad idea, or let's go back to the drawing board, or let me help you go back to the drawing board and figure out a different path.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today, we have a very special guest, Kirk. Matt is my mentor. We met at a hackathon in Seattle where he was an advisor of my team. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. My name is Matt, and I've been really, my career has gone through many different variations. So I started my career as a financial quant, working with hedge funds and mutual funds and kind of this statistical analysis. And then I became a software engineer, and then the last iteration of me is a data scientist. And so I work for a startup called Zeitworks now as a senior data scientist. But I've had many different roles, from C-level to founder to lots of different things along the way. So I've many different versions of Matt, that's for sure.
Yeah. So today I'm very excited to talk about your career journey, your advice to data scientists, and I will dive deep into a few very cool machine learning models Matt built. So let's start with your career. Can you share what happened in 2008?
Yeah, so I started my career as a financial quant. So I went to school at UW, and I studied economics and mathematics in my undergrad. And after I graduated from college, I was like, wow, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I think as everybody kind of does after they graduate college. Yeah. And I thought, well, okay, I know mathematics and I know economics, so I'm going to go get a job in finance because that makes the most sense, right? And so I actually got a job working for a company. It was owned by Eaton Vance, and now they're part of like Morgan Stanley. So very much kind of the New York, mutual fund stuff. And I was doing basically what people would call quantitative research, research analysis, taking, stocks and trying to figure out like how to make rich people richer. That's kind of the thing, right? And 2008 was also a special year because it was the middle of a financial recession.
Yeah.
In 2009, right around my birthday, actually, I think it was like 2 days before my birthday, I got called into an office, and it was basically like, we're making cutbacks, and you're one of them. And it was tough. I think right out of school, I figured, well, I'm doing all the right things. I got a job. I'm working really hard. I'm working extra hours. I'm really putting in a lot of effort, and to be called into an office and basically be like, hey, you're not going to come in tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was tough. I think it's interesting because, I'm a pretty cool and collected person, but I was not cool and collected then. I think it was one of those times of like, wow, I don't know what to do. And it really led down an interesting, there's like the silver lining of all of this of, I had a mortgage and, I was doing all the things that I thought that I should be doing. And I spent about 6 months looking for my next job because I was very junior. I didn't really have a lot of experience, and I was focused on finance, being in finance. And let's see, it was around like August or September of 2009. A friend actually asked me, it's like, hey, we're working on a website and we need somebody to help us write some PHP code. And I said, oh, okay, sure, I can help with that because I just been a computer nerd my entire life.
Yeah.
And that's what led me down a path of always taking on new opportunities. So I became a software engineer for a company in Seattle called Wet Paint, which is no longer around, but kind of like BuzzFeed before BuzzFeed. So very gossipy. And then while I was working at Wet Paint, they're just like, oh, mathematics. Like, can you help us classify what Facebook post is going to be more successful or not? Which got me into machine learning in like about 2009-ish. It honestly, like, a lot of my career has been almost by accident. And it's like the market is giving me opportunities and I'm just going for them. But yeah, it was, being laid off, your first job really sucks.
Yeah.
And it kind of, for a few years, I was pretty jaded and pretty angry about that. But it really opened me up to a lot more, just being open to whatever happens.
Yeah.
And just being kind of open to the good and the bad.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And we'll definitely talk more about your shift of mindset later.
Yeah.
So you got into data science and machine learning because as an engineer, you got into this classification problem. So how did you learn machine learning while you're working on it?
I would say that I've taken the very the slow path of learning machine learning. And when I say slow, I would say that a lot of it has come through experience. So I people will give me a problem that I can't solve with regular code. And then that led me down to, originally it was like, oh, I'm going to learn about support vector machines or like, k-nearest neighbors or kind of basic machine learning models. And I just kind of keep like learning just a little bit each time I do a project. I would say that like, originally it was just very much like, well, we can't do this with code, so I have to learn some new models. And luckily, I studied mathematics in college, so I mean, learning about stochastic calculus or optimization or any of those things, like I could kind of pull from all of that. But yeah, it's been very much I'm kind of like making the path as I go along.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a lot there. There wasn't a lot there at the time. I would say that now, like, probably don't do that. Like, there's so many great resources. But at the time, it was very much like, it was almost very academic. So I was trying to turn that into something that I could deliver. So
yeah. And for people who want to get into machine learning, what's your suggestion? Because there are so many resources out there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that there's kind of two different methods. So it's kind of like this old saying of you have fast, cheap, and good, right? And pick two. So one method is you go to school at a really good school and you learn from people who know what they're doing. I think that's fine. It can be kind of expensive, to go to schools like Stanford or Berkeley or whatnot. I think that there's also really good, like, online courses as well. The problem with that is that, like, it depends on what you're going for. I would say that it really comes down to getting experience, and that can be anything. It's just like picking a project and seeing it through to the end is really the best way to learn this stuff. Because I think that from what I've seen, like, a lot of people will get these kind of toy data sets like Iris or the adult data set. And it's almost better to just say, if you work at a company, or maybe you work, maybe you go into school, you can build your own data sets and do some analysis on your own. It doesn't have to all be from, UC Irvine.
That's the grad school I went to.
I know. Yeah. That's why I said it. They're famous for like all these cool data sets, but, I think that's a really big thing, is just like, you can go find your own data, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be, maybe fantasy football, I mean, it doesn't really matter.
I agree with that. I always suggest start with something you're passionate about, and then you find your own data, because that's a very important part of being a data scientist.
Totally.
So I know you worked on a lot of projects. Can you share one that's most challenging?
So probably the most challenging projects that I've worked on are kind of have a lot more to do with the amount of data. So what I mean by that is the computer vision projects that I've worked on have been really difficult. And I think that the reason why is because you're working with massive data sets. So I worked on a project where we took a lot of photos of asphalt, and basically we were using YOLO, which is just like you only look once, I think is what it stands for.
Yeah.
It's an object segmentation like neural net. But the tough thing about computer vision is that there's so much data flowing through it that it becomes a big engineering project. So I would say that like that was a really big project, and it was really rewarding and challenging.
Yeah.
Just because of the amount of data floating around. Because working with terabytes of photos, it's just it gets into a whole different world of you can't just load it all into memory.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of data science and a lot of machine learning is done in a Jupyter notebook, which is totally fine. But sometimes the data gets huge.
Yeah.
It's really deep. Yeah.
So when you have to handle a lot of images, how did you solve that problem?
Yeah. So what we ended up doing is we were using PyTorch. So PyTorch is great. Facebook is behind it. And a lot of it comes down to dealing with, I guess people would call them data engineering problems. So it's kind of like, how do you load data? And we just built a lot of data loader type stuff to basically like deal with, the training. And it was kind of more just, we were using Azure. So not AWS, but in AWS, you would use EC2 instances and like kind of spin up a cluster and that kind of a thing. But yeah, that was a lot of it. It's just kind of like the model itself is actually pretty straightforward. YOLO is, it's not super straightforward, but it's like the model itself is pretty encapsulated. It's almost like getting everything into the model. That's a difficult problem. Were you able to solve it within some pipelines in PyTorch, or you have to build something?
We
had to do a little bit of, we definitely used a lot of what PyTorch has kind of off the shelf. But then there was also some issues of like the client. I did consulting for many, many years. The client was very concerned with security. And so everything was kind of like in these funny areas. They were very worried about making sure that everything was safe and like secure. So we had a couple of extra little things to deal with, but for the most part, like it was just pretty straightforward PyTorch, like data pipelining type stuff. Yeah.
Cool. And what is something very interesting you worked on that you solved with machine learning?
Interesting as in like interesting in the grand sense, or
you had most fun worked on.
I worked another client of mine is a UK startup, and they were focused on influencers on Instagram, and that is a very weird world. Suffice it to say, who is more influential on Instagram has a lot to do with how you look.
Yeah.
It was an interesting project in that it was kind of like, the people who are really big on Instagram are like a lot of the time they're like fitness influencers.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of like this thing of like, I'm at the gym and I'm doing like squats and deadlifts and stuff like that. And so me testing out my models and code, I'm ending up looking at Instagram like fitness influencers who are like showing off all their like, their assets, so to speak. And it's just like, what a weird thing. But at the same time, like it was interesting because it really shows like why. I just learned a lot about like Instagram in general because I don't use Instagram.
Right. I think that's very important. And when we build a model, it's not just someone say, hey, you use this data, do some forecasting. You actually need to learn the domain knowledge. You become a domain expert yourself. So even for Matt, who doesn't use Instagram, you have to become an Instagram expert. And for me, I worked on a football project to help football coaches improve strategy, and I know nothing about football, so I have to read a book about how to watch football, and I watched my first like football game. So I mean, I still have to lean on the domain expert, but knowing their vocabulary definitely helps me to communicate with them so I can understand, okay, what are some features I might need to collect.
It's such an important thing, because I've seen this happen where data scientists or very academic minded folk like really want to live in an ivory tower, and that is a major trap. It's so much better to just listen to whatever the domain is. And so like another funny example, the football. I actually worked on football too. At one point. NFL is very lucrative, which is interesting. But I actually ended up watching. It was The Bachelor, the show The Bachelor, because we were trying to understand TV and gossip and kind of this whole like TMZ like BuzzFeed stuff, and it's like, I don't watch The Bachelor, but how am I supposed to work on something without putting myself in the user's perspective? It's so important, because at the end of the day, like machine learning models are just tools. They're algorithms, and it's really what you do with it and where does it go. And for the influencer project, can you share more about how you collect the data, what model you use, and how do you evaluate the results? So we did a couple of things. Let's see. So I think here's a very common thing that I've encountered is that, first of all, in the marketplace, there's a lot of misunderstanding of what machine learning does. So like a lot of people will be like, well, I just want to turn it on, or I want to use AI. It's kind of like my 2022 goal is to use AI. And it's like, what does that mean? So with this client who's in the UK, they had access to a massive Instagram like fire hose. And what I mean by fire hose is basically just a lot of like Instagram posts like floating into, they're using Mongo and stuff like that. But then they said like, okay, well, we want to find what are those long tail, they were focused on hashtags or like entities that are influential. So like, what are those things that we can really mine? And it's interesting because like there's two problems there. One is like, what can you actually influence? So what hashtag that's really specific can you influence, and what can you take over? But then there's also like finding the entities, and that's actually a very difficult problem because like, in natural language processing, if you talk about like Tesla, what does Tesla mean? Is it a car, or is it the inventor? And that's a really interesting space. So a lot of what we did was natural language. So trying to mine all these Instagram posts for like, what are the latent, or like, what are the influential things that somebody can talk about to become more influential? I mean, that's really the end goal, right? The other thing was also a computer vision problem of we're trying to understand who's a brand, because like you'll see like Patagonia, REI, like all of these like big brands on Instagram, and who's actually a person. And that's actually also a difficult problem because like, sometimes there'll be, it's just very different. And doing that at scale, you have to start to dig into these computer vision like models or like deep neural nets. So that was a lot of it, is just trying to find signal in all of this like data, because billions upon billions of Instagram posts. It's like, well, what do you do with it? And that was a lot of what I did there.
And you mentioned that you build some models, and then later on you want to see, whether I should use a neural network. So I'm curious to see, what's your model iteration process? Like, how do you find a baseline and then make it complicated? What is your thought process there? So I'm a firm believer in not using neural nets and deep learning as much as you can. So pushing it off as absolutely far as you can.
I believe personally in there's this idea of crawl, walk, and run. A lot of the time, if you're very clear as to what the problem is that's trying to be solved, you can come up with a very quick solution just to quickly verify, like, is this even valuable to put money into?
Yeah.
Because honestly, doing any of the deep neural nets costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
GPT-3 is an amazing, like, innovation, but it costs millions upon millions of dollars. So like with them, it was very much this thing of, first we did very basic statistics of like, well, if we just know the terms that are important, like how influential are they? Or like how much reach do they get? Basic stuff like that. And then from there it became, well, let's use some natural language processing tools, so Spacey, and we didn't use GenSim, but we used a little bit of Spacey to do some tokenization and like fast text to do some like, word embeddings. And then from there it was just like, okay, we need to start to dig into the computer vision. And yeah, it really is this iterative process and a dialogue between the customer and the person delivering it. So it's kind of like, I'm trying as a data scientist to deliver a product, but I'm also trying to listen to what the market is telling me at the same time, because sometimes, an Excel spreadsheet is good enough.
Yeah.
It's just like, and if that's good enough, fine. I don't need to pull out like, the state of the art technology.
Exactly.
It's a waste of resources to over engineer something. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And what are some other things that when you work with data scientists, you see they make mistakes?
Yeah, one thing that I see a lot, there's two things, and it really depends. So I've seen this a lot where data scientists will try and write everything themselves. I've seen this a couple of times where people will write out their own algorithms, or they'll come up with their own like inventions.
Yeah.
Because we're all highly intelligent people, and it's like, wow, like I can come up with all this cool math and whiteboard, and that's a major trap in 2021, because you can go to GitHub. You can go to GitHub and type in what you're trying to solve, and like 9 times out of 10, there's somebody out there who's solved exactly the same problem. So I find that a lot of data scientists will get trapped in kind of this "it's not invented here" syndrome of like, well, I can do it better, and it's like, be careful with that, because like I've fallen into that trap before too. Because we all have egos, and honestly, a lot of that ego is healthy. It's like, yeah, people are smart, but seriously, go to GitHub first, or go to like, wherever you find like, go to Towards Data Science or any of these like resources, see what everybody else is doing first. That's a big one. I think the other thing is also like pushing back. That's another thing. I've noticed that like sometimes a business type person will be like, well, I just want a machine learning model on this. And it's like, well, what do you want a machine learning model to do? Like, and I think that there's a misunderstanding of what ML and AI do of, it's intelligence. And it's like, I think if anything, artificial intelligence was a terrible name for what it is, because it's not. It's algorithms. It's about like learning. And I feel like a data scientist a lot of the time needs to be able to say, no, let's not do this. This is a bad idea, or let's go back to the drawing board, or let me help you go back to the drawing board and figure out a different path. And yeah, also like Excel can do a lot. As much as it pains me to say that, a lot of the time you can just deliver an Excel spreadsheet and people will be happy. Like seriously, start with the stupidest, simplest problem first. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And so I remember you worked on a fraud detection model.
Yeah, I did a contract, again, like I worked as a consultant for many years. There's quite a few different companies I worked for. One of them was Sheer ID, who's a great company who does verifications. So like if you go to Spotify, I saw you had Spotify on your computer, and you were like going to school, you can get a discount. You know, it's like, oh, like I'm going to UW or I'm going to UC Irvine or something, right? I get a discount. Sheer ID are the people a lot of the time who are actually verifying that you should be able to get the discount. Here's the thing though, is like, a lot of the time it's very simple. It's just like, you know, I'm at school, like I'm going to school, that's in the record. That's not a problem. But then there's some times where people will use a different name, you know, so like this happens a lot where, you know, somebody will pick a different name when they come to the United States because of, you know, English versus another language. You know, there's many different reasons why people use a different name. And so Sheer ID does a lot of verification of like, are you really who you say you are? And sometimes like there's this document verification process that happens. So basically, long story short is that with using some pretty, you know, modern-ish type stuff, so Caboose, basically we were able to figure out like with a fairly high accuracy, like who is fraudulent and who isn't. Because most of the time, people are following patterns to commit fraud. It's interesting because in security and you know, fraud and basically whenever people are trying to get around something, a lot of the time they're using software to do it. So it's actually a great example of where machine learning does well. Spam is a great example of you could find out spam pretty quickly, and it doesn't even really require super sophisticated models. But yeah, that I did quite a bit there.
And so why you choose to use Caboose to
that's a good question. So Caboose is kind of my favorite machine learning model because of a couple of reasons. So there's obviously XGBoost, Light GBM. There's also another model that I really like from Microsoft, explainable boosting machines. That one's a little bit newer. Caboose is from Yandex, I think, which is like the Russian Google, I want to say. And the reason I like Caboose so much is that it does pretty much what all the other models do. So it does, you know, boosted ensemble learning, which is really the way to solve a lot of these machine learning problems. But also it has really nice categorical variable like encoding in it, which 9 times out of 10 when I'm doing a project, there's some version of text in there. There's some categorical variable. And you know, you can do all of this in any model. You can use one-hot encoding anywhere. You can use ordinal encoding anywhere. And you know, basically these are just ways of taking text and turning them into, you know, numbers. But Caboose just makes it really easy. And I like easy. So that's why I really like Caboose. It's also, you know, if you do the meta analysis of going on Kaggle and saying, you know, who's winning the competitions, a lot of the time it kind of comes down to XGBoost, Caboose, kind of these boosted learning models. You know, that's important too. I would also say that the other thing that I really like about Caboose is that they put some effort into explainability. I feel like that's a big problem with machine learning is that I can build the best model possible. Like, let's say I do something in PyTorch or Keras or, you know, TensorFlow. If I present that to somebody who doesn't know what that is, they're going to ask, well, why does it work this way? And I won't have an answer. So Caboose actually gives a lot more like explainability too. So
besides Caboose, what are some other models you like?
You know, I like Light GBM. So that's, I don't even know, gradient boosted machine, I'm assuming. That one's really good for embeddability. So I've actually used that model and embedded it into Rust. So using WebAssembly. So that's really good for speed and for like portability. So I've used that a couple of times. XGBoost is great too. I find that fine. I really like explainable boosting machines, although I don't use it all the time because it's slow to train. But for some things, it's so cool because you can, explainable boosting machines is built off of this idea of additive models. So you can actually show a graph of how something impacts the model's output, which is so great for presentation.
Yeah.
Of course, I use all kinds of, I really use whatever is best for the job. You know, sometimes I will have to use a transformer model or like, you know, an LSTM or some of these like fine tuning type, you know, you basically take Inception V3 or MobileNet or whatever and then fine tune it. It just depends on the case. But for like traditional machine learning, I kind of go for Caboose and light GBM.
Yeah. I think that's what most data scientists use today. Like you mentioned, it really depends on the problem. But based on what I have seen, a lot of time people just use, XGBoost or Caboose, like GBM to find a baseline. And if they need to do something more advanced or multi-model solution, they'll add something else.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to is that like, you start with the basics, and if that's not good enough, you just kind of keep going on and on and on. And I'm in an interesting space of I work mostly startups, small companies, and consulting. So I don't really get into the super heavy like academic models very often because most of the time it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
you know,
you
it's
just
like,
want to solve the problem.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, so you worked a lot with startups. So what is it like to work with startups that you find, you know, maybe is different from working in a big company?
Yeah, you know, this is a really good question. I've been thinking a lot lately about, so I actually trained a lot as a musician. I played trombone for many years.
Wow.
I was, in high school, I was number 2, not number 1, but number 2 in the state. So I was fairly good at trombone. And so I got to play with, you know, trios and orchestras, and they're very different. It's one of these things of, and I've noticed this with companies too. Startups are very different than big companies. So the biggest company I've ever worked with was the finance company, which was, you know, thousands of people across many continents, kind of a thing. It's very, very different. Generally speaking, they're both fine. What the difference is that it's specialization more than anything else. At a startup, you're kind of expected to do 15 jobs. And for somebody like me, I love that. I love to be able to learn new things. And also with startups, a lot of the infrastructure and the thought hasn't been there already. So it's kind of like I have to come in and start doing the thinking and the pioneering, so to speak. And that's what's really interesting is that like at a startup, you can kind of take the lead without it turning into political backlash.
Yeah.
So you're not going to really ruffle anybody's feathers at a startup by taking the lead.
Right.
If anything, people will love it. They'll be like, great, I'm glad you're taking the lead on this. At a bigger company, that really doesn't work. There's definitely more politics, and I think politics kind of get a bad rap. People kind of say, you know, like, I hate politics, you know, it's like, I don't want to play this political game. I think that politics are kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, realistically, like, you have to, at a big company, get buy-in from much more people than just yourself. And so a lot of the work at a bigger company involves more meetings and more making sure that you have the right people agreeing with it. You know, so at a bigger organization, I find that understanding who the economic buyer is in every room is so important.
Yeah.
And a quick way of figuring that out is figuring out who all the conversation is going towards. It's not always the person who has the biggest title. Sometimes it's the person in the back of the room who is saying nothing, and then everybody looks at and says, hey, is this okay?
Yeah.
Always pay attention to them and make sure that they're buying into things. So I think that it just becomes very different. The one thing that I will also say is that like I feel like at big organizations you can kind of like be a little bit more you're more protected. So you don't have to always be firing on all cylinders, but occasionally people will notice. So what I mean by that is it's kind of like in an orchestra where like you'll be playing music, and like as a trombone player I would like not play at all. Like I'd play for like 2 notes in a piece in a symphony orchestra, but those 2 notes had to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that's very par for the course in big organizations. It's like you might not have to be firing on 110% every day, but the one day that your boss is looking at you, you must be like working correctly. So it's I think it's different. So yeah, they're very different. But I find that like I learn more about politics at a bigger organization.
Yeah.
At smaller companies, startups kind of focus more on individual contribution more than anything else. And I think they're both important. You have to be able to deliver, but then also you kind of have to play the influence and politics game too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And for data scientists working at a startup, what kind of skill set do you think they need more than working in a big company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that at a small startup, data scientists there's kind of 2 paths that data scientists can go down. So I've taken, well, I'll say that in a second. There's 2 paths. So like I like this distinction of data scientists. There's type A and type B data scientists. So type A is kind of the analysis, like analyst type stuff. So if you're going to be an analyst, a lot of it is dealing with customers, getting buy-in, getting some domain expertise, like understanding the domain. Some of it's sales. A lot of it is sales, especially at a startup of like, you get on a call with a new client and you explain the model to them. So that's kind of the type A data scientist. The type B is the builder. And that's really more of what I am, is I'm a more of a builder than an analyst. Yeah. And those are really kind of the software engineers who take the model and then turn it into code that can be deployed and scaled and all of that stuff. It really depends on what somebody likes to do. That's what's so cool about startups for me, is that I can kind of make my own path and figure it out as I go. So.
And also you work with different companies, so you learn about different industries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like some project got you into watching Bachelor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, I've been exposed to some interesting projects. I worked with a pharmaceutical company, which got me really into the whole, like, I learned a lot more about the opioid crisis from their point of view, which was just like very eye-opening. So yeah, if you like a lot of exposure and to learn a lot, like, startups are awesome.
Yeah. Or you can work for a organization or like be a data science consultant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know you also worked a lot on churn reduction. Can you share some project you worked on?
Yeah, so I worked quite a few years with a company called ClickFunnels, which is a landing page company, and they're highly successful, and you can Google them, and so they're a very successful SaaS company, so software as a service. And here's the thing about software as a service, is that unlike what it used to be in the past, where you just bought like a license to something, like, people want to pay every month. And the issue with that is that you have this revolving door of people coming in, but then also people going out. And the thing is that, like, churn is kind of it's the dark horse of like every SaaS company. Every SaaS company has this problem of churn, because, somebody will get really excited about a new software. They'll sign up, they'll put their credit card in, and then a month later they'll be like, why did I buy this? And a lot of what I did with ClickFunnels was trying to get really clear as to what is leading to churn, specifically with them. And churn is a hard problem, because it has this, in data science terms, there's a censoring problem of basically the time window is all messed up.
Yeah.
All you have is like, well, I know that so-and-so churned at this time, but I don't know if this other person's going to churn or not. And that leads to all kinds of issues with most machine learning models because you kind of have this incomplete data set. And so what we ended up using a lot of the time, I mean, we did some basic classifications and that kind of stuff, but then we kind of started getting into more of the just actually older stats models. So like more of the regression style models, which seem to work a little better. Which
like
is
survival.
Yeah, exactly. It's all survival analysis. And that was actually a big lesson to me. Is like, I think originally I'm like, oh, I'm just going to use like, whatever state of the art. And to be honest, like we ended up using, stats models, like from the Python, like stats model, like survival type stuff mostly. And worked fine. Yeah. And that was the other thing that I learned too. This was a really big, lesson learned for me is we had a lot of data points that would lead to churn, but those were all data points that we could not influence. So what I mean by that is it was like, somebody downgraded their plan, or somebody hasn't logged in like 30 days. And the problem is that I would present this to the stakeholders, and I'd say like, hey, like, the biggest factor is whether they logged in the last 30 days. And they'd be like, okay, great. How do we get people to log in?
Yeah.
And it was a big lesson to me of, a lot of the time the data that I had access to, we couldn't do anything about. I mean, it was this kind of like no brainer that if somebody didn't log in, they're not going to pay us.
Yeah.
It really taught me an important lesson of like following through and pulling the thread as much as I possibly could, because just because the data was easily accessible doesn't mean that it was good data or quality data.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And I'm also curious, as a data scientist, especially when you work with startup, when you have those findings, okay, this is the churn analysis. Now people will ask you, okay, now what? How can I use this information to improve the business? So how did you suggest the marketing team to influence their customer?
Well, so this is a funny one. I think being really specific with ClickFunnels gives out free domains, and this is part of their offering, right? So this is on clickfunnels.com, and part of that is because we figured out that when somebody has a custom domain associated with ClickFunnels, they're more likely to stick around. And it's interesting because like it's great that we give out free domains, or they give out free domains, but it really didn't change anything. It was kind of like one of these things of like, we delivered that to the marketing team and they're like, oh, this is great. We know that if somebody has a domain enabled, then they'll be more likely to stick around.
Yeah.
So then we just give out free domains. But then the problem is that it didn't really change anything, because I think the problem is that like, in that particular case, the people who were going through the pain of setting up a domain, paying for it, and then bringing it over, were just more likely to stick around, period.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So like when they say, okay, we'll just give out free domains and then we'll hack our way to a better retention rate. And it's like, this is another problem I've encountered with data science, is that it's very much a whack-a-mole. Like you think like you figured it out and you try something, and then it's actually incorrect.
Yeah.
Or there's a variable that's not in your model.
Right.
I mean, that was probably all of it. So, yeah.
And in general, so if you are helping the business measure the engagement, how do you design the metric, and how to use that metrics to kind of influence behavior? Yeah,
I'm a firm believer in... there's a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution from Covey. I think it's like Franklin, the people who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Okay.
Yeah. So that same company wrote basically an equivalent for companies. They kind of wrote like,
interesting.
These are the 4 disciplines of execution at a company. And there's a piece of that book that is so important to data scientists of talking about leading measures versus lagging measures. Leading measures are things that lead to whatever goal it is that you have. Lagging measures are they're just like regressive. They're based off of the past. So like a great example of this, what I always think of is, people always want to lose weight or like get into better shape. So what they will do is they say like, well, I want to lose 15 pounds. That's fine, but that's a lagging measurement because it's based off of what you did in the past. Versus saying, I need to focus on how many times I worked out or how many calories I ate. And this is the thing that is so important with data science is that like we a lot of the time our models are built off of lagging measurements. So it's like revenue or profit. And this is very soft. This is soft skills. But what are the measurements that are leading to success? And I think with data, with our models, like we can get there. But that is the lens or the prism or whatever you want to call it that I use to figure out like what are the metrics that are important is where does this metric lead versus, everybody wants to make more money. Everybody wants to, lose weight or whatnot. But it's like getting really clear as to like what it is that you're measuring that will lead to that goal.
Yeah.
That's such an important thing. So.
Yeah. So instead of just say, I want to lose less money, I want to waste less time, think about what do you really want? What's your North Star and work towards that.
Yeah. And exactly. And it's highly subjective. For instance, with like, I've seen this where it's like, we want to increase revenue by 20%, or we want to, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's like increasing revenue by 20% means many different things depending on which company you're at.
Yeah.
So at some companies, that means how many sales calls do you make? Or at another company, it's how many Facebook ads have you put out? It's very subjective, but it's so powerful to really get clear as to like what it is that is leading to success versus just what is success.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's very important for data scientists to think like a business owner instead of just, work on this project. So I'm sure when you, in the beginning phase of a machine learning project, you were talking to the startup founders or product managers. So how do you identify the right problem to solve, the right metric to measure?
That's a great question. So some of this, pulls on a completely different track of my history of, I feel like so much of so much of my job is facilitation. So what I mean by that is a lot of the time it's interviewing people in a way to get them to uncover what they may or may not have already known. And when it comes to working with startup founders or business owners, a lot of the time I'm trying to get really to the depths of whatever it is that they're after. And in a lot of ways, that is a very emotional thing for them, whether they realize it or not. It's kind of one of these things of like, what are they terrified of? Or what are they most excited by are the best things to work on. And a lot of the time there's this like certain level of asking questions that surprise people enough for them to actually give you the true answer versus just like the lip service of like a great trick that I don't really play these tricks on people. But there's a good book called, Instant Influence, I want to say. And there's this whole section of motivational interviewing, which is basically asking questions that people don't expect just to throw them off enough.
Can you give us some example?
Yeah. So like a quick example out of the Instant Influence book is you say, okay, machine learning is let's say, okay, I've encountered this where somebody says, we want to use machine learning more at our organization. I've heard that one a lot. And it's like, well, what does that mean? So then I'll ask, okay, like how motivated are you to use machine learning at your organization? Scale of 1 to 10, just tell me. And, people would be like, well, I'm an 8.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, 8. Here's the trick. Most people would think, well, why isn't that higher? Like, that's the question, right? Well, actually, the better question to ask is, why isn't it lower? Why isn't it 7? Why isn't it 1? Why isn't it like super non-important? And then people will start defending themselves and they'll be like, oh, well, it's really important because I'm worried that we're losing market traction, or I'm worried that like my boss is going to fire me, or, it depends.
Yeah.
But it's really about getting to what is somebody really afraid of? Or what is somebody super excited about? And sometimes it also just requires even more questions. So like another great example is, you can ask people, what's at risk if I do this? What's really at risk if I do this? And if you keep asking that question, eventually somebody's body language will change enough that you'll be like, oh, that's the real answer. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. It's I'm serious. Like it's, because I think in business, business startups, wherever, people kind of carry around these personas, which are really just shields. It's just like we're trying to like protect ourselves, and that's totally fine. But if you can get to the bottom of what somebody's after, it just opens up a whole new world of like, oh, that's what you're after. You're after like a promotion. I've gotten to that one before where somebody's really just after a promotion, and it's like, cool, I can help you get a promotion. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I think like getting to the real thread of honesty is so powerful.
Yeah.
So
and I think when we either work on machine learning project or any type of work, a big part of it is people, the relationships, although you cannot see them, but it's those invisible lines that sometimes pulling whether they're still interested in the project, whether they want to invest in it, or sometimes if some people just don't like each other, maybe the project will fail.
Yeah. One thing you just said is is another great trick to play on people, taking things away. So like machine learning tends to be kind of a, it's like, it's a nice to have, like, it's like, oh, we really want to have this. And then, people will drag their feet on a lot of projects. If you do, sometimes like I've done this before, where we'll be like, oh, like I know that you're not interested in this anymore. So like, I'll go work on something else. And if you say that to people, usually people will get a little combative and it's like, what are you talking about? I'm still interested in this. And it is a little bit of a trick, but it's also kind of a motivational technique to get people to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Because I think, unfortunately, data science and machine learning kind of gets glopped into this whole like it's nice to have, or oh wow, I read about this in TechCrunch or whatnot, and I heard it's really interesting, but I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
And part of our job is to be clear, but then also to get people motivated about it. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I know you call them tricks, I think, because it can get controversial, because sometimes people say, oh, those influence skills are manipulative. And I think at a bottom line, it can go both directions. I think the most important thing is your intention. Are you using those tricks to help this person find out what they really want, or you just manipulate them to do something you want? Right. Yeah.
That's all of it. I think that's a really good thing to call out is that, because yes, you can use tricks for good and bad. And it really does come down to, what's the difference between influence and manipulation, right? It's like, what is the difference? And the difference is, who does it benefit? Right? It's one of these things of, if I am influencing you in a way that only benefits me, that's manipulative.
Yeah.
I mean, that's manipulation, like 100%. But if I'm influencing you in a way that benefits you, that's really kind. I mean, it's just like, and that's what's so interesting is that I think, unfortunately, there has been a lot of people in history who've used techniques to get their way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't have to be manipulative,
right.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I really love this topic. And then you previously mentioned working with people, observe their body language. So and also there are different type of, schools on how do you understand people based on their either motivations or communication style. Do you have a framework for you to not like categorize people, but just understand people easier?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's so many models. So I actually heard something which is interesting. I really like, people like Myers-Briggs and there's DISC and Myers-Briggs and all these different models that like explain people's motivations.
Yeah.
And I think use as many as you can because people are incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And my personal opinion about things like Myers-Briggs is that like it's a good start. There's so many others. So a great example is that some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people are kinesthetic.
Yeah.
Just knowing that tells you a lot. I do this thing where like I'll point my ears at people, which is like a sign that I'm listening more than I'm like. So I'm very auditory.
Okay.
So that's almost always like a sign, like like I'm just listening to you. Knowing that's really interesting because you can kind of start to tune into somebody's like wavelength a little better. And I think use them all. So Myers-Briggs, DISC. I like the Enneagram. Some people don't. I feel like it's pretty like woo-woo.
Yeah.
But I think Enneagram is very powerful too. I study, there's a theory called integral theory, which has to do with like different stages of awareness. I feel like using them all as much as you can and studying as much as you can about people. And there's also a self-serving aspect to that. The more you study about people, the more you understand about yourself.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the more that I see things in other people, really I'm just seeing it in myself because I'm projecting it onto them.
Right.
There's all kinds of different frameworks and I could go off for a very long time about them.
We need to have an episode 2 just talk about this.
Yeah, I'm also a big believer in some of Carl Jung's work. I think I said that to you.
Yeah.
Archetypes are interesting. So very short tangent on archetypes. These are kind of they're like images that you will see in like movies, it's kind of like the warrior or like the king or the, the sage, right? And the thing is that like everybody has a different connection to those. So like some people will be more warrior-like and some people will be more king-like or, and tuning into those aspects of people is really powerful. I kind of try to learn as much as I can about people because again, it helps me understand myself. So there's a little bit of a self-serving part to it, but it really helps of even something like, I know so-and-so is I'll use the Enneagram. It's like, I know so-and-so is an Enneagram 4. So then I understand some aspects of their personality.
Yeah.
Or
4
I know,
is the individualist.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I think I have like 4 is like my secondary.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, and some of this is, it can be a little bit of a trap because I don't think it's good to typecast people either. Because Myers-Briggs is kind of a little bit like that. So like I'm an INTP and it's like, well, but that doesn't tell you everything about me.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a strong opinion about Myers-Briggs. So for people who are not familiar with this, so it's basically have 4 categories and each category have 2 classes. Yeah. I think this something we deal with in machine learning. How do you calibrate your prediction, right? So this model is very naive. It just does a cutoff at 50%. But my challenge is whenever I do the test for the introversion, extroversion, and thinking, feeling, I'm always around 50%. So my result sometimes is like extroversion thinking or introversion feeling. And then when I So that's another thing. When you look at your model, don't just look at the category it predicts. Look at the probability, the score.
Yeah.
So when I look at the score, it's either 49, 51. So the 50% cutoff doesn't make sense. And I think the same goes when you categorize the model. Look at the score. If everything is around 50%, maybe you need to think of different ways to calibrate the category.
Yes.
For me, I feel if you are around 50%, it doesn't really make sense to just dichotomize it. Maybe if you are high in the 80s or low in the 20, you can extrovert, introvert, and then something in the middle. Maybe it's just like, I don't know, undecided, or give it a category.
Yeah. It's first of all, somebody with an Enneagram 4 tendency would say something like this. But I totally agree with you. So here's my personal take on all of this, is that really we are all of them.
Yeah.
So like we are both extrovert and introvert. It just really has to do with what comes online for us.
Yeah.
Because and here's a great example. So with archetypes. So a lot of people, I've done a lot of like volunteer work with people and with like men's work, and so we use a lot of archetypes. And some people will be like, well, I'm not a warrior type, or whatever, right? But here's the thing: is like it's so contextual. And sometimes things just come online.
Yeah.
So like warrior is very much like, the person who's going to war and like, going to take charge and that kind of stuff. And a lot of people be very laid back, right? But here's a great example, is that I'll ask somebody who's like a father or a mother. It's just like, well, what's going to happen if somebody like steals your kid? It's like, what are you going to do? It's like, you're going to freak out, and you're going to like turn on that like aspect of you that you might not know is even there. And I think it's the same thing with Myers-Briggs. It's like, there's a trend right now of like, it's great to be quiet, or it's great to be introverted. And it's like, we're both.
Right.
It really depends on what you're pulling from at any given point. So it's like, you can be both, and you are both. I mean, it's just like, I'm incredibly introverted in my actions, but that doesn't mean that I can't like go be extroverted at like a networking party.
Yeah.
It really just depends on what I'm turning on and turning off. So I'm right there with you about my frustration about the Myers-Briggs is the same. It's just like, I feel like it can be a little misused. I work with somebody who's like, I'm an INTP, and it's just like, I'm an INTP and they're an INTJ, and it's just like, cool. What do we do with it?
Right.
So yeah.
I think it's also feel it's good to study those and do those tests, but don't put yourself in this pigeonhole. Oh, I'm just allow the test results to label you.
Exactly. And I think Enneagram, Enneagram's interesting because it's like, again, we're all the Enneagrams. It's not like you just get to pick one and that's your entire life. Because there's an aspect of every Enneagram number that's in everybody. It's just a matter of where's your center of gravity, I guess, so to speak. It is very much probability. I mean, I think that's what's so interesting is that, using data science and machine learning or, probability, it's like, we just have a discrete distribution is really what it is, you know? So I love talking about that. And so you have worked on a lot of machine learning projects and in different industries. What are some projects you have failed, and what lessons you learned from it? I would say my biggest failure is the book that I wrote. I have a cool book that I wrote for O'Reilly, and it's fine. I think that it kind of went a little sideways for many reasons. I think it turned out okay in the end, but to be completely honest with you, that was around the time that I was going through all this crap in my life of like just like having cancer, and my dad passed away, and like that was actually around the time that I was coming out with the second version of this book that I wrote.
Wow.
And it's it really turned into kind of this, I got it done, but I don't think it had enough time. Book writing is very difficult, and it doesn't come naturally, I think, to anybody. I think a lot of, it takes a lot of time and a lot of like thinking time. And I just didn't have the mental space for it. But I still had an agreement to make it. So it was kind of like this issue of, I was going to finish it, but it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. It sucks because, well, first of all, I feel like machine learning has changed a lot. So the software itself has changed so much in the last 5-ish years. But yeah, it sucks because like it's one of those things that sticks with me because and I kind of hold it on my sleeve because I have a book cover on my wall behind me in my office. And I mean, I feel like if I had more time, it would have been different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You mentioned software has changed a lot. So over the past 5 years, what are some big shifts you observed?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift is that, it's interesting because I feel like back when I was first starting doing any machine learning, it was very much every algorithm had its own package and its own like installation path. So if you were to use, support vector machines, you would go to the libsvm website and download that and like compile it. And there was all of this setup. And what has changed more than anything else is that it is so incredibly easy to get started and to install this stuff. So, you can load up Google Colab or, basically like load up a Jupyter notebook on the cloud and it has everything you need. Anaconda is great because like you have NumPy and Pandas and all these tools just kind of there ready for you. And when I first started, it was kind of like a mixed bag of some of it was somebody's master's dissertation or master's thesis or like PhD dissertation that wasn't really fully done, or some of it was like actually used by people, or it was all owned by MATLAB and it was very expensive. And things have become so much more democratized and cheap that it's super easy to download state-of-the-art stuff and get going on it. So I would say that like fundamentally what has changed is that it's become so much less of it's just become so much easier to get started, because I feel like at the time, 10 years ago, it was very much like you'd spend a week trying to find the best tool and then identify all the issues and all of the missing pieces to then like work around it. But now it's, pip install whatever you want,
right?
Whether it's Caboose or XGBoost or Lite GBM or, you can use scikit-learn, of course, Keras, PyTorch. All these things are incredible. It's like there was no Spacey, there was no fast text, no GenSim. So everything was NLTK too, which was, it's still around and it's okay, but it was hard to use. I feel like the barrier to entry is so much less. So, which is great. Big believer in it.
And there are so many new papers published every day, a lot of new tools. So how do you stay up to date while not overwhelm yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a lot of papers coming down the pipeline. And if you go on to, towards data science or, there's all these roll-ups of papers. And honestly, I worry a little bit about data scientists reading too much into the new stuff because it's kind of like, it's the old like Bruce Lee thing of like, it's not about how many different kicks you can throw. It's like, can you do one? Like just start with one kick. Like don't worry about swarm learning or like, federated learning or what just came out of Google. Don't worry about that stuff. And then when you're ready for it, where I get my research from, Nature. So Nature magazine, not like nature as in like plants and trees. Although Nature is great too. Nature is a huge lens into major research.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're a great journal.
Yeah.
And one of the problems with Nature is that a lot of it is like biomedical research. So you're going to get a lot of, like lately, it's all about research on different vaccines and stuff like that. But actually, you will get things like Alpha Zero and Mu Zero and kind of this like deep mind projects written up in a very, very nice way.
Oh, okay.
And they'll have links to like the GitHub repositories. I read a paper about swarm learning, which I'm really big on. I find that Nature's good. I struggle to recommend others out there. And the reason why is because I feel like there's a little bit of a trap of reading too much into what's going on in the market.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. And honestly, most of it is not applicable now. So, it's good to take a little bit at a time.
Right.
But it can turn into this problem of like, using exercise as a good example. It's like, yeah, you can read everything you want to read about how to exercise and, the best possible like arm curl you can do, but nothing replaces going and exercising. And I feel like reading too much into the research is a little bit of a trap.
Yeah.
It's just like, unless that's your job, like as like an academic or something. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great advice. And then you talked about you're into swarm learning. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in swarm learning. Very quickly, swarm learning is basically the next iteration on federated learning. So federated learning is let me back up a little bit. So machine learning, you have a data set and you want to train a model off of the data set, so you should use like cross-validation, that kind of a thing. So basically like, I train up a model and then after the model is trained, where does it go? A lot of the time it'll go to like a server. So a lot of people will do this thing of they will train up a model, pop it into some like, EC2 box or, whatever, and it will give you results. That's kind of been what a lot of people have been doing, and it's all Python, and that's great. The problem with that is that a lot of the time it can be a little slow. So there's network latency. There's a couple of other issues, just like might just be slow in general, and sometimes it's over-engineered. So like if, for instance, on your iPhone, you want quick machine learning inferences.
Yeah.
So federated learning is kind of like taking that a little bit further of saying, I still have a central server that collects data, but I have all of these like edge devices that are sending data back to the server. So it's like taking that idea of basically saying, I want to have a bunch of iPhones that are collecting data and sending it back to a server and then training that way.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think federated learning is very cool. So basically, you learn through collective intelligence. So this is like this idea of you have hundreds of thousands of people traveling through traffic, and you want to learn in real time, and you can use kind of this federated learning type model. The problem is that there's still a central server.
Yeah.
You still have to send it back somewhere. Swarm learning is taking that further into the application has been on precision medicine. So basically, like we want to collect data about people, and we want to share it in a way that's private and secure. So the idea is, I mean, this is still a little conceptual, is that you take the data from edge devices and you're still learning from it, but you're sharing it over a blockchain, which is an interesting idea, because basically you can have these like nodes or like groups of people who are learning together without them knowing about each other. And I think that is really interesting to me, because I feel like, there's issues with like privacy and computing edge, or like computing at scale. And this kind of pushes it further and further to the edge.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer also in edge AI, which is really effectively like pushing the inference and training as much to the end device as possible. So I've been really into this idea of Rust So Rust is just a programming language,
Yeah.
and you can build a lot of TensorFlow-like models in Rust using a tool called Tract, which is from Sonos. And I think it's cool because it's faster, and it makes things faster, and so therefore it kind of opens up a new opportunity for us of like, you know, people can learn in a browser, or they can learn on their iOS device, or they, you know, and I think that that's really interesting. Still to be determined though.
Yeah. So if people can learn it on their, you know, device, how do you see the swarm learning and Rust will change the future of the machine learning landscape?
I think that it's just another iteration off of like, you know, where do you put the inference and where do you put the training? I think that there's just new applications. So like I feel like swarm learning is very valuable with like security, because a lot of security is you still effectively have to send data to some random server and then learn like, is this secure? Is this insecure?
Yeah.
If we're able to do that with blockchain in a very private way, you know, basically nobody would ever have to know that. So no company would have to sit as an intermediary and like collect information on people, and you know, people will be safer on the internet, which is a good thing, you know. But you know, there's still work to be done there for sure. So,
yeah. Cool. And so you work a lot with startup, and then they usually move really fast. Is there a time when your model doesn't work and there's a deadline but you can't deliver? What did you do?
This is the age-old problem with software engineering and estimation is, you know, when is it going to get done? And then the age-old answer is 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
And it's just like those 2 weeks will come and pass. And I think there's a couple of things. I think originally, earlier on in my career, I would just kind of push through it as hard as I possibly could and deliver something. And I still think it's important to deliver something. I would say that like if the model is really going sideways and not going well, then it's on me to really communicate that effectively with whoever it is. If it's really not working out well, I need to make that clear, because I think at the end of the day, like people don't want to deliver things that don't work. So like making it, you know, it like the worst case example would be like if you built a machine learning model that's like 50-50.
Yeah.
Or it's like maybe it's like 51-49.
Right.
Like okay, that does something, but that's not what most people want.
Right.
And I think that there's kind of a threshold of like, if it doesn't meet the minimum threshold, then it's kind of like, you know, we need to figure out a different solution. So throw it away or find a new project. And I think, you know, if that really does get to that case, and it doesn't happen super often, then there's always a lesson to be learned to kind of move into the next thing. But I would say that in general, like in those cases, like I would deliver something, but then it would be like a like, look, this is not very good.
Right. But this is the evidence that it's not going to work.
That's exactly right. I think, you know, delivering like, hey, this is why this is so bad.
Yeah.
You know, usually people are pretty understanding about that. I've kind of yet to run into somebody who had unreasonable expectations with that, where it's just like, just deliver it anyways.
How do you communicate that when that happens?
I'm a believer in communicating early and often. So I use all the tools that everybody probably uses, so Slack and that. And I think it's one of those things of like, somebody should not be hearing about a failure at a delivery meeting. So like they should know way before then.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is kind of going a little weird. They should know way before then, because like nobody wants to have a surprise.
Right.
And I think that's something I've learned experience wise is delivery meetings or board meetings, any kind of like meetings with like pointy haired bosses, as they could be called. no surprises. There should be no surprises. Let me backtrack. There can be a surprise of you did better than expected, but no surprise under.
Yeah.
So it's like if you set the expectations in the right place and you say, hey, this is not going well, this is not going well, and then it turns out okay, that's okay. But it's just so much better to set the expectations as low as possible.
Right. And sometimes I think it's because we really want to impress someone. We overpromise something and then we can't deliver. Do you have any tips in setting the right expectations with people?
Yeah, so I find that as a data scientist, I have a let's call it an extended vocabulary of terms. So there's all these terms in data science of, recurrent neural nets and all these different terms. And I find that the most important thing for me is to get down to whatever level somebody is at and be, so what I mean by this is like basically like being as clear as possible without any data science terms, using whatever terms they're using, and really trying to be honest when I don't know something too. I think that's a really big key, is being very forthcoming that I have, like, if I don't know what I'm doing or if I don't have an answer, I just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I do not know, and make sure that like really sinks in, because I think the problem that data scientists run into is that, we have all of these terms. So we have, neural nets and LSTMs and we sound really smart, but sometimes we don't know. We don't know what we're doing.
Right.
And I think my job is to get to whatever level somebody's at first and foremost. So like not using jargon and speaking as clearly as possible. And then also, I think, I don't know how to explain this, but it's like, I don't want to be talking at them, and I don't want them talking at me. I want to be talking together. There's kind of this like, there's like an energetic thing of like, I don't want it to be combative. So it's just like, we're on the same team, we're after the same goal,
right.
And this is what I know. Here's the data. Here's kind of like, my gut feeling on this, and here's kind of my assessment, or like, I don't know, this is probably not going to turn out well, or like, it'll probably turn around, but I don't know. I think that's what it's all about, is just being as clear as possible. But again, it very much depends.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think you brought up something very important. Sometimes it's not about the words you use. Is behind communication is always your mindset. Do you see the other person, as a opponent or a teammate, right?
Yeah.
If something on your team, you feel comfortable, be honest with them because you want to achieve this goal instead of just, I look good, you look bad.
Right, exactly. I think, I'm trying to remember the term for this. It's a big thing in negotiation where it's like, you don't want to be in conflict with people.
Right.
It's very much kind of here's another example. It's kind of like I took an improv class like years ago, and it's like never saying no to somebody, but then like working with whatever they're talking about. So like, instead of saying, but, you say, and you kind of keep the conversation going. And then it's very much like in my mind of like, I'm trying, like we're on the same team, like we're all in this together, like it'll be fine. But I don't know. Yeah. I also read some books talking about that. There's, I think, I forgot which company it is, that they have a culture. They don't say no. You say yes, maybe I'll have to do this later. I can't help you right now. But to be honest, maybe just my own communication style, I can see someone is using that trick and I appreciate that. But sometimes I also feel frustrated. Yeah.
Hey, it's easier for you to just say no instead of for me to figure out, oh, actually this is a no.
Yeah.
Right. So have you find circumstances where no is more productive?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I felt that way before too. Especially because as you learn more about some of these, like, negotiate, like how to do negotiations or how to do sales, you start to see it.
Yeah.
You start to see people playing it on you. And I think that in those cases, really the people who are very good at this stuff start to recognize this and then be like, actually, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'll just level with you right now and I'll tell you the truth. Like, because, it's one of these things of like, just try to not get so overly attached to one method of doing something because everybody's different. And it fundamentally comes down to listening to what people are saying and what their cues are. And honestly, if you and I are having a conversation and I notice that you're starting to get a little like, what is, come on, like, tell me the truth here. Then it's on me to kind of be like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to tell you the truth. Like, no, we're not going to do this, and I think that is such an important thing is so contextual. People are kind of amazing in a way because we're so incredibly complex. And personally, as a data scientist, I get very excited by that because it's like, it's a never ending study.
Yeah. And you shared a document you wrote about giving good presentation. Can you share some tips with our audience?
Yes. So I find that presentations are really important for data scientists. So there's a couple of things that I've learned through giving many different presentations. The biggest thing is kind of having a good story arc in general. So like what I mean by that is that generally speaking, presentations should have a path that you're trying to get to. So a presentation might be like an after action, like narrative of like what happened and what went wrong. That's one kind of an arc. Another one is an opportunity. Another one could be a crisis. Kind of like what is the general like principle of what you're trying to present? Like what is the encapsulating idea? So like what is the big idea that you're really trying to press? I find that in my work as a data scientist, a lot of the time it's an opportunity. So it's kind of like, we went off and we looked at some data and we think that there's a new opportunity here. So that's very much kind of like here's a new opportunity. That's really important for me as a presenter to figure out like what is the unifying principle that kind of like is everything. From there, it's really good to get to like, okay, here's the big idea. And what is the supporting evidence? So like generally speaking, I find that every presentation kind of follows into the 3-part structure. It's very much like you have one big idea and then like 3 supporting ideas. Organization is very important. But I would say that more than that, the best presentations that I've ever seen really come down to, it comes down to honesty. So you'll like, generally speaking, what I will do is I'll present one idea and then I'll present the antithesis to that idea. As just like they're 2 equal ideas. And then the presentation becomes kind of this integration of the 2. So like, here's the opportunity. Here's all the reasons that it could go wrong. And then through the presentation, it's about like going back and forth to like basically come up with like, this is a real opportunity and like, this is how we're going to go forward. I would say also every presentation, there's some very important pieces to get right. So the first, 5 minutes of an hour-long speech are really important. So usually in those first 5 minutes, you have to get people's attention and hold it. and it will get much worse on like webinars where like, people's attention's on like YouTube or whatnot. But really it's about getting people's attention and holding it. So that's really important at the beginning. At the end, it's really important for somebody to know what to do next. So like, what is that call to action? Like, what are you going to do next? So these are all kind of tactical things. There's a book that I read a long time ago. It's called like How to Move Mountains with Words or something like that. I'll have to look up the title, but it's out of print and it's a little old school. But it's this guy who ran like AT&T's like Bell Laboratories presentation stuff. And it's pretty funny because like the visuals are about like using overhead projectors and things like that. But it's very good at explaining you want to basically hold both sides in a presentation. So like the thesis and the antithesis, and then over time you just kind of like bring them together because it's more entertaining and more educational that way. So another way of phrasing it would be cognitive dissonance. So it's like good presentations have a little bit of cognitive dissonance where people are like, wow, that's really weird, or that I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Because when humans are surprised or there's a little bit of dissonance, we get more interested. And I mean, you see this all the time with like YouTube or whatnot, where it's like, you know, this weird trick that Bob played on me, you know, and it's just like, oh, I want to click on that.
Right.
So that's a lot of good presentations. I would also say in terms of data science, removing as much jargon as possible is very, very important. Richard Feynman, the famous physicist that everybody probably knows, he had his method, the Feynman method, which is basically like bringing it down to a 5-year-old's level of vocabulary. I think that's so important. And I personally struggle with this of something called expert blind spot, where it's like when you're studied enough on something, you kind of start to think that everybody knows this stuff, and it's not true. I think the Feynman technique is very important. Although don't patronize an audience. I've run into that a couple of times where it's, you know, it's kind of like, well, this should be obvious or whatnot. It's not.
No.
And that's a nervous twitch of mine. So like, that's just this is what it is. So,
yeah. That's a good advice. So you mentioned previously when you were writing a book, there are a lot of challenges in your family and your health. So can you share more about what happened there and how did you kind of come out of it?
So in 2015, backing up a little bit, I wrote 2 books. One was written in 2014 and the other one was really written in 2015, but then was published in 2016. And they were kind of meant to be like, you know, the first one is a start, and then the second one was kind of like a refresh and rethought. And basically, long story short, I signed up for way too much in my life. There was a time when I was going to school. So I was studying for a master's program, writing a book. I had more or less a full-time job and a contract all at the same time. And, you know, studying computer science at the graduate level and also writing a book and working is way too much. And I think I was in this state of, you know, you should always say yes to things, say yes, yes, yes. And I think that's fine up to a point. But then at some point, it's really more important to pull the weeds. You know, there's this like a gardening analogy of like, you have to pull the weeds. Like whatever's not flying, like just get rid of it. And I didn't do that for many, many years. It was kind of like, you know, after I got laid off in 2009, it was kind of like this idea of like, well, I just got to work really hard to get as far as I possibly can in my career. And, you know, it's good to work hard, but then there's a threshold where it's too much. And I definitely went past that. And 2015 just kind of like all fell apart. It was kind of like, it's a little bit like Breaking Bad, you know, where he's like starts out like kind of like a little comedy and then it just kind of gets worse and worse and worse and worse. I didn't become Walter White, that's for sure. But you know, it basically like at the beginning of that year I was working and then I said, you know what, I'm going to take like some time off and focus on health. And then I went to therapy for the first time in my life. And I went to a doctor for like the first time in like many, many years. And the doctor is just kind of like, there's something weird here. Then basically it was like, oh, we found a growth in you. And like, oh, shoot, okay. And so we monitored for a couple of months, and then it was like, oh, it's getting bigger, so you better come in next week. And it was cancer. It kind of went on and on and on, and so I had 2 surgeries. One was outpatient, and the second one was like I was in the hospital for like a week and I couldn't walk, which sucks. And then my dad passed away in a car wreck, and it just kind of all happened at once. And this was around the time that my book was like supposed to be coming out. And O'Reilly, I'll give O'Reilly a lot of credit. They were very kind, very willing to work with me, and I've done a lot of presentations with O'Reilly since, which I love working with them. But I feel like this book really shouldn't have been published. It just it was rushed out. Yeah. And I think that what I learned from that is there's a certain level of really burning the fire, burning the candle at both ends kind of a thing. That's fine. But there needs to be like a respite and a time to rest and reflect and, really chill out. It's kind of like one of these things is like, you can't build a fire without wood, and it's just like wood, conceptually, like philosophically is kind of like, go for a walk or something, like just relax. And, what came out of that is good. So first of all, I'm cancer free, which is great. It's like 5 years later, which is awesome. And, I meditate, and I've done lots of men's work, which is really good stuff. So that's kind of like, it's not really group therapy, but it's good stuff.
What is the men's work?
Yeah. So men's work is interesting because like, I think that, right now there's a lot of men have done a lot of awful things in the world. Like without getting into it, like, there's like Me Too and all of these like things that men have really screwed up on. And I think that, people say it's like, oh, these are like, God, somebody said it to me. It was like, these are like women's issues. And it's just like, no, these are men's issues. Yeah. Like guys are causing all of these problems. And I think a lot of that comes down to there's this conspiracy of silence with men, of like not talking about the pain and the things that we just push down inside of us, and it comes out in really bad ways. And for me, it was like I got cancer, and it's just like burnt out like royally, which is great because I didn't affect other people. It was just me. But I think in other cases, there are men out there who are suffering who do affect other people. And so there's different variations of men's work, but effectively it's like, men taking ownership for their own crap in their life, and like working through the trauma, the pain, the whatever it is that somebody has, and it depends. Like some people come out of prisons, and people are drug addicts. Some people are totally normal suburban dads. Right. And that really helped me it's weird to say this, but it's very freeing to be in a room with a bunch of other dudes who are like an emotional mess. Yeah. It's like and I think that like
that's what girls do all the time. I know, right? And that's normal.
That's what I'm saying. It's so funny. It's like guys are so bad at like opening up about the truth. It's like we're so worried that like, oh, you're a wuss or like whatever. And it's just like, it's so freeing to just say the truth. So that's what came out of that is like, I did that. I mean, I really still do it. With the pandemic, it hasn't been happening as much like in-person stuff, but there's that. And then that hooked me up with a lot of Zen meditation. And I do a lot of that. And it's so important to, people say mental health and it is, it's health, I mean, it's not even mental health. I mean, it's just health. It's like a part of us that is, if not addressed, just derails everything else. I mean, it took me, a year to come back from 2015.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, like I went deep on the like burnout. I think, people talk a lot about burnout and it's very prevalent because I think we're not taking the time that we need.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, just like, seriously, just stop, you know, like just slow down a little bit. It's fine. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned meditation. So what are some other tools that help you, you know, grow yourself?
Yeah. So one thing that's helped me a lot, actually, surprisingly enough, is taking my vitamins every day. I am amazed at how different I feel just by taking the right vitamins. And what I mean by that is like specifically like I take omega-3 and vitamin D because I mean I live in Washington, right? So there's no sun here.
Right.
And I take vitamin B12 every single day. And that has completely changed how I see everything. And it's kind of it's like a mental fog being like lifted off of me. So I think first and foremost, like, you know, physical health is very important. I would say, you know, meditation is very good too. Being in silence is interesting. You know, there's so many different versions of it. You know, people do Vipassana and Zen. I do Zen. There's also like, you know, Insight Timer, like on your phone, and just like take a breather. It's surprising how powerful it is to just sit and breathe for like 5 minutes. There is something very important about it that I think we kind of forget about in modern society. It's kind of like we're always like pushing things and, you know, going out for it. And it's like, seriously, 5 minutes, you know, and then, you know, just take a breather.
Yeah, we all have 5 minutes, but sometimes I feel that I'm procrastinating. I'm not doing anything productive. But if you ask me to take 5 minutes to breathe, I also feel, oh my God, I'm like wasting my time. I'd rather, you know, scrolling social media and stuff. So it's like the mindset. I always feel like I'm rushing somewhere, although I'm procrastinating.
Yeah. You know, you bring up a really important point of the first time that I find that, you know, I've done quite a bit of meditation. And I remember the first time I meditated, and it's like, all I could think about is, you know, oh gosh, like I better take care of this, or I better go do that. And it's one of those things of like, you know, a teacher will be like, hey, just sit down and breathe. And you sit down and breathe, and it's like, all of a sudden it's like, who the hell let this person in here? Like, you know, this like yappy, like chihuahua in the middle of our mind, you know? And that's what's so interesting is that just sitting with that for a long enough period of time, the chihuahua like starts to slow down a little bit. And it's also interesting too, because doing more meditation, time kind of like melts away in a lot of ways. And I wholeheartedly feel the same pain with like, oh, I better go like, you know, check my email or check my Slack messages. And I think that what meditation does is it's a discipline of saying no to things.
Oh, interesting.
You know, and a matter of fact, like one of the biggest Zen koans has to do with no, saying it's not really saying no, but it has to do with no. And it's so freeing to just say no to everything for 5 minutes. And it really opens up this ability to see the bigger picture. So I'm a big believer in it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And so what are some qualities you think that's helpful for a successful career?
Oh boy. Qualities. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that a successful career just comes down to consistency, showing up. I would say that, you know, there's lots of qualities that can lead to a successful career. I just find that fundamentally it comes down to being just plodding along and like being disciplined and doing the same thing over and over and over again. I would say that learning matters a lot too. Like always be open to learn something new, you know, be friendly.
Be friendly?
Yeah. I mean, I maybe not like friendly in the like, you know, let people trample over you, but like it's interesting because I feel like the higher you go up in an organization, there are really nice people who are like C-level executives.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, I mean, there's ruthless people too, but I feel like most of the time, the people who make it to those levels are really great people and very kind, and they're not like ruthless killers.
Yeah.
I mean,
good to know.
it's interesting because I think that there's a little bit of that, like in business, like you have to be able to say no and, say the truth. But I always think about, like, when I was starting out my career, I called a CEO on the phone of a major company, and he picked up the phone and talked to me.
Oh.
It was really nice.
Yeah.
And it was like, because I think of like Gordon Gekko or like these like, ruthless like Wall Street thug type people, and it's just not true. I think that, if you're maybe not nice, like as in like you let people walk over you, but just like a kind person, like you just, I don't know how to say that. Yeah, there's some energetic thing about people who are at the high levels of organizations where they just are people. I mean, they just, they're not trying to like, just trample over people,
right?
Yeah, it's almost like you're working for people rather than like working against them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And you also mentioned keep learning, and for data scientists there are always so much more to learn. So how do you like organize your learning, your notes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently took a class called Building a Second Brain, and this is from somebody named Tiago Forte, who I felt like this was one of the best classes I've ever taken.
Wow.
And the reason why is because knowledge, it's interesting. We live in a society right now that has so much knowledge. You can Google the solution to just about everything. It's like, oh, I have a headache. I'm going to put that into Google and it will say, you should take aspirin or, ibuprofen or whatever. There's so much knowledge. So then the question is like, how do you, what is valuable anymore? Is it knowledge? And it's like, I don't think it's actually knowledge. And this is coming from Tiago Forte with Building a Second Brain. He says that the thing that is valuable right now is perspective. And that makes a lot of sense. It's basically like building a perspective, curating all the knowledge into something that you have a point of view. And Building a Second Brain, you can Google this and you can kind of figure out like the model that he proposes. But effectively it comes down to, there's kind of like two tracks. Like one is separating what is actionable now with what really needs to be kind of like put into the back burner. So with the things that are actionable, like put that into a to-do list, or like, put that into, you could use Todoist, or there's like Wunderlist. There's all these, like basically have a list of things to work on. But then for the knowledge pieces, basically, this is what I've been doing is I write up like little tidbits of notes into Notion. I use Notion, but other people use Evernote or OneNote or Roam Research. And as I'm reading, and I can read anything, it doesn't matter. Like basically I'll just read, oh, this is interesting, I'll read that. Highlighting notes, storing it into a note repository in a completely non-distilled open way is so important. And then from there it becomes, okay, I got the stack of notes, and they could be, Zen meditation and machine learning models and, new exercises to try. I mean, it could be anything. I have a stack of notes. Then it becomes, you want to organize that. He uses a model called Para, which is basically like you have projects, areas of interest, resources, and archive. You organize it that way. And then you come back and then you start to like summarize it. And this is such a powerful technique because I find that as I'm reading a new paper about machine learning or towards data science, I'll highlight something in Instapaper, which will automatically go into my Notion using Readwise, which is the tool that I highly recommend. And then from there, I'll pull it into a new Notion notebook, and I'll have all these quotes like already for me.
Oh, wow.
It's so incredible. And then I'm the person who highlighted everything. So I already have a perspective and I already have a lens. And then I can take like a stack of all these quotes that I've taken and then turn it into something new. And that's really what a lot of it comes down to, is expression. And I've been personally using this at a startup, kind of like I go out and I'll read stuff about business process management or, lean or, the Hackett business benchmark. It's stuff that's kind of boring and crafty. And I'll highlight things. And then it's almost kind of like I'll learn something new just based off of my own research. And here's the thing that really kind of blew my mind is this whole idea of having a second brain is, we have our brains and we can memorize stuff. But if you have a notes repository that you can search, it's like your own personal Google. And it's incredible because I don't know about you, but like every time I Google something, I find a bunch of crappy articles. It's just like they're not good articles, and they're highly optimized for SEO, but they're not very good.
No.
Versus if I Google I Google my own second brain, I'll find like here's my machine learning like Notion page, and these are the things that I'm interested in at this moment. It's just completely different. So I highly recommend Tiago Forte's stuff. I'm a huge fan of his stuff. So
cool. Thanks for sharing that. That's all. I struggle with that a lot whenever it comes down to writing a blog. Just put everything under my nose. So I'm sure I thought of something earlier, but I just can't find it.
Well, and that's the thing is that like this whole process that he has, it's like he calls it code. So basically capture, organize, distill, which is basically like highlighting and bolding certain passages, and then express, which is like, blogging, or, you could put something onto LinkedIn or like, do a podcast. What's so cool is that you never start with a blank page. It's like you always have a page full of notes. And that's the thing that I think, as somebody who's written a book, that's the thing that sucks is like starting with a blank page. It's not good. And with the second brain, like you never start with a blank page. There's always something there. And it also works with how we are as human beings too, because I find that when I read, I want to be like, sprawled out on a couch, like with an iPad, like just kind of thumbing through stuff and not really thinking that heavily. And I can do that. So I can read a Kindle book and highlight stuff, and it will just go into my second brain. So that in the future I can pull from it if I want. So
yeah, that's really cool. I definitely check it out.
And
now looking back at your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I mean, beyond the slow down, I think, patience is probably what I would tell myself. Is just like, seriously, just slow down a little bit. The other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to ask questions. And what I mean by that is something very specific of, I think there's the going idea of like, I don't want to ask a question because I might look dumb or something,
Right.
I think it's important to ask questions, especially when you don't know the answer. But also I think it's also really useful to ask for what you want too, even though you might not get it. I think that, early on in my career, like I was very like timid with finding new work or talking to people.
Right.
And, it's just like, oh gosh, are they going to like think I'm an idiot, or like all the imposter syndrome stuff. And, it's interesting is I find that now I have this mindset of like, I will just take like a handful of seeds and throw it out into a field and kind of see what happens. And it's almost kind of like if I can just, send somebody a note and say like, I actually did this really recently where there was somebody online that I was like, wow, this guy's really cool. Like I'd like to talk to him.
Right.
I sent him an email and he was like, oh yeah, sure. Like let's talk. And I wouldn't have done that 10 years ago. I think more than not, people are much more willing to chat and friendly than I think I would have thought when I was early on in my career.
Thanks for sharing that. That also was some mistake I made when I just joined Amazon. I was worried that people would think I'm stupid, so I didn't ask questions. And then I learned very slowly. And also when I become more senior, that becomes a problem as well. So sometimes I really have a stupid question to ask, but I feel, oh, would other people think I'm not good enough? Right?
Yeah.
And also asking for opportunities. If you don't ask, the answer is always no.
That's right.
I think it is also going back to the mindset. Are you playing to win, or are you playing to not look stupid? Mm-hmm. Because those two things will change how you behave, right? If you constantly optimize around, I don't want to look stupid, then if you never do anything, if you never take any risks, you'll never look stupid, but you never grow your career.
That's right. Yeah. It's all risk. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is risk, and it's just showing up, and asking questions, poking around. It's just like, and not being a jerk about it, obviously. Like, don't do that either. Don't be a jerk and be like, hey, like, I'm going to ask like, really abrasive questions, but just be curious. I think being curious is so important, even curious of like, I find that when I ask people like, hey, what should I do for my career next? Or, that kind of stuff. It's like just being curious and open.
Yeah.
A lot of the time people will have an answer or a thought, yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think about the future of machine learning?
I feel like machine learning is getting to actually a peak of maturation where we're starting to see some of the wrinkles in it, some of the cracks, and I think that's good. And namely, I think that ethics are becoming more important. Explainability is becoming more important. I think also this is a little bit philosophical, but I feel like a lot of machine learning's big leaps forward are not necessarily AGI, so like artificial, like general intelligence. It's more we're building models that are getting better and better at discriminating certain things. So like if I take a photo of the road, I know that this is a stop sign. And I think we're starting. I think I'm noticing that people are realizing that. There's this case example of like Volvo with self-driving cars where it was actually struggling with kangaroos jumping across the road. Yeah. And I think we're starting to realize that, machine learning is a great tool. It's like, you can do computer vision stuff very neat. You can do entity detection. I mean, all these amazing things, but there's still these bigger questions that we need to answer. And, to use a very coarse term, I think machine learning is very good at kind of the little mind aspects, like kind of the things like, if I ask a support agent a question, here's the article that you should look at, like very little mind stuff, but we're not finding a lot of the big mind stuff. So like, ethical dilemmas and kind of these other like human centered things. So I feel like we're starting to go in that direction towards like, ethics and all of that. And I also feel like there's a lot more like human in the loop stuff going on where it's like, machine learning is really good at this, but humans are still good at this aspect, kind of more of the ethical oracle, I guess you could call it. So I feel like we're just kind of like entering into a whole new, AI assisted type stuff. I'm kind of not in the camp of believing that, AI is going to take over the world and like, we're all in some simulation kind of stuff. But I could see what people are talking about, but then it's also kind of like, I feel like we have a long ways to go until we get to that. But I feel like, we're making good progress, ethics being a huge one. Cause I think that, as we point machine learning at more and more things, we start to realize that, oh shoot, like, this is uncovering some variables that are really kind of icky, it's like whether I think a good example is the like computational policing, where it's like you're sending police to in neighborhoods where there's a lot of diversity, and it's just like that's not okay. So I think it's good. We're kind of maturing, so
yeah. And for data scientists who want to prepare for the future, what's your advice for them? I
mean, I think that honestly, like reading about ethics is actually very helpful to me personally. So, there's quite a few examples. So you can read about Belmont Report. And so these are old school like reports that were done about ethical research, and IRB I don't even actually know what that stands for, but basically like, learning more about like what is ethical and what is not ethical, I think it is actually a useful use of somebody's time. I think learning about explainability in AI is also very useful. So there's new models coming out. So I talked about explainable boosting machines. That's an explainable AI solution. But there's also like SHAP and Lime and other things out there. So feature importance is a big like thing. I think that's really big. I feel like we're kind of at this stage where we need to explain what we've been able to accomplish, and do it in a way that's not hand wavy, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Because sometimes we don't know whether it's just our model get lucky or, is there really some signal?
Yeah, I mean, right. It's just like, what do they say? Like a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah.
This is like, are we building broken clocks or are we actually building a clock?
Right.
And I think, there's also other aspects of, the whole black swan idea of, really machine learning is an inductive science. And what happens if we start seeing black swans everywhere? Is this going to work? Maybe, maybe not. And I think, learning more about that kind of stuff and, how to deal with it, so, yeah.
And before we wrap up, what is something you're currently working on, and what is something you're excited about in the future?
As I said before, I've been working at a startup, Zeitworks, and what I've been working on there, I really like working on product stuff. So I've been focused on like building a product and a startup, and I think what we've been working on there is interesting. Of we're kind of trying to build like this human in the loop type tool, and a human in the loop tool, and also like trying to demystify like what a business process is. So knowledge work is hard. If you strapped a sensor onto my machine and tried to watch me work, I don't know if that a machine learning model could figure it out. And I think that's a really interesting problem to figure out. What is predictable in terms of, people working in offices, and what is not predictable. And that's kind of what Zeitworks has been focused on. So I'm very excited about that. I honestly, like, that's been my big thing. I think other than that, like, I'd just been being a father, so like I spent a lot of time with my 2-year-old, like going on hikes and stuff. So like that's kind of my big thing, is just like trying to chill out and relax with my kid. So
well, I observe a color shift when you talk about your daughter.
I know, she's the best. But I also like working. I do some presentations once in a while with like O'Reilly, and I've got an interactive course coming out, and I do little things here and there. I really truly love to teach data science and machine learning, because I like it when I love that time when somebody figures something out and that light bulb goes off. It's just such an incredible experience. So those are kind of the things that I'm super excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for listeners who want to, find your work or reach out to you, invite you to speak, how can they find you?
Yeah, so you're welcome to go to my website. I'm redoing it. So there's not really much there right now. It's matthewkirk.com. I also have another website that's a little bit older, yourchiefscientist.com. Honestly, for anybody who's watching this, you feel free to send me an email. It's totally fine. I'm a person like anybody else, and I do respond to emails. They're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn too, but I don't do as much LinkedIn as you do. I'm kind of more of an email guy. I'm like old school that way, I guess. But you can send me an email. It's just Matt at matthewkirk.com. I'm hoping to do more stuff on my website. I just kind of paved it all, and I'm going to start over, because I think it's my life. It's kind of been my life, is to kind of just start over and keep trying new stuff out.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has really been a pleasure. So seriously, thank you.